There are a lot of books and videos about the autoimmune side of Sjogren's disease, but did you know that Sjogren's also shows up in your body in ways that most people never connect to this condition, including your brain, your heart, your immune system and even your sleep? So in this video I will explain 6 ways that Sjogren's disease shows up physically in the body. Let's start with looking at how Sjogren's impacts the brain. When Sjogren's triggers chronic inflammation, that inflammation does not stay in the glands. It reaches the central nervous system and begins disrupting how the brain functions at a level that most people living with this disease have never been fully told about. The immune system in Sjogren's attacks the small blood vessels and the nervous tissue that the brain depends on to carry out its normal processes, and over time this disruption causes what many people with Sjogren's describe as a fog that never fully lifts, no matter how much sleep they get or how much caffeine they consume. You may notice you cannot hold a thought for long enough to act on it. You may walk into a room and forget why you went there. You may struggle to find a word mid-sentence even though you know with certainty it is somewhere in your mind. You may sit down to read something simple and realize 10 minutes later that you have read the same paragraph 4 times and still cannot tell someone what it said. These are not signs of aging prematurely. These are signs of a nervous system under sustained immune attack. If that sentence just landed for you, if something in what I've described so far sounds familiar, I've put together a symptom map that shows exactly how this condition progresses, what shows up at each stage, and where the standard tests are most likely to miss it. Type symptom map in the comments right now and I'll send it to you directly. Because what I'm about to show you next is why that map matters more than most people realize, and why the stage you're in changes everything about what happens next. Research published in peer-reviewed journals has confirmed that Sjogren's causes measurable deficits in attention, memory retrieval, and executive function, which is the umbrella term for the ability to plan, organize, prioritize, and follow through on tasks. Neuropsychological assessments of people with Sjogren's have repeatedly revealed impairments in both short-term and long-term memory, in visuospatial processing, and in verbal fluency, meaning the ability to retrieve and produce words efficiently under normal conditions. Some people with Sjogren's develop a more severe form of central nervous system involvement called encephalopathy, which is a condition where the brain simply stops working as it should. This can manifest as confusion, difficulty understanding language, and in very advanced cases, seizures. Brain MRI scans in Sjogren's patients sometimes reveal subtle subcortical abnormalities or white matter lesions, which are small areas of damage in the brain tissue, and these structural changes help explain why the cognitive symptoms in Sjogren's are not imagined or exaggerated. They are visible. What makes the neurological side of Sjogren's particularly cruel is the timeline. Studies have shown that neurological symptoms in Sjogren's can appear before the more recognizable hallmark signs like dry eyes and dry mouth, sometimes by as much as 2 years. This means that for many people, the first sign that something is wrong with their body is not dryness. It is the brain not working properly. And because brain fog, memory lapses, and cognitive slowing are also associated with anxiety, depression, and menopause, the neurological symptoms of Sjogren's are among the most frequently dismissed and misattributed by clinicians who are not looking for the underlying autoimmune cause. Surveys consistently identify brain fog, physical fatigue, and pain, not dryness, as the most disabling symptoms for people living with Sjogren's. The brain fog in Sjogren's is not vague tiredness. It is a documented neurological consequence of a disease that the brain is quietly fighting every single day. If this is something you are experiencing or recognize in someone you love, type the word brain in the comments right now. That one word tells me this part of the video landed and it helps this information reach more people who need to see it. How Sjogren's impacts the heart. Have you ever heard that an autoimmune disease could affect your heart? Most people who receive a Sjogren's diagnosis are told about the dry eyes and the dry mouth and the fatigue, but very few are told on the day of diagnosis that Sjogren's carries a measurable and documented risk to their cardiovascular system. Yet the research on this is clear, consistent, and has been growing for over a decade. People with Sjogren's have a significantly higher rate of cardiovascular complications compared to the general population, and this increased risk is not small or marginal. It is meaningful and it deserves a direct conversation. One of the most well-documented cardiovascular risks in Sjogren's is pericarditis, which is inflammation of the pericardium, the thin protective sac of tissue that surrounds the heart. Research has found that people with Sjogren's have nearly 3 times the risk of developing pericarditis compared to people without the disease. When the pericardium becomes inflamed, it can fill with excess fluid, a complication called pericardial effusion, and this fluid buildup places pressure on the heart muscle, making it harder for the heart to expand fully between beats and compromising how efficiently it pumps blood to the rest of the body. In some cases, pericarditis causes significant chest pain, shortness of breath, and a feeling of pressure that people often mistake for a heart attack. In milder cases, it can be entirely silent for months before it is detected. Beyond pericarditis, Sjogren's is also associated with a significantly elevated risk of atrial fibrillation, which is an irregular and often rapid heart rate that increases the risk of blood clots and stroke. People with Sjogren's have been found to have a 54% higher risk of ischemic stroke compared to the general population. They also have nearly double the risk of venous thromboembolism, which refers to blood clots forming in the deep veins or traveling to the lungs. And they carry a 90% higher risk of developing pulmonary hypertension, which is high blood pressure in the arteries that carry blood from the heart to the lungs. This is a serious condition that places long-term strain on the right side of the heart and, if left unmanaged, progressively reduces the heart's capacity to function. The mechanism behind all of this cardiovascular risk comes back to the same force driving every other manifestation of Sjogren's: persistent, systemic inflammation. The chronic inflammation that Sjogren's generates does not stay contained to the glands. It circulates through the bloodstream continuously, and over time it damages the inner lining of blood vessels, a process called endothelial dysfunction, which accelerates the development of atherosclerosis, the narrowing and hardening of the arteries. One study found that half of the Sjogren's patients examined already had evidence of atherosclerosis, and that this vascular damage was associated with the presence of anti-SSA antibodies, which are one of the key autoantibodies that define the disease. Sjogren's is not just a condition of dryness. It reaches the heart, the blood vessels, and the entire circulatory system in ways that require active monitoring from the very beginning of a diagnosis. If the heart connection surprised you, type the word heart in the comments. It helps this video get seen by more people who are searching for answers. How Sjogren's impacts the eyes and tears. This is where most people first hear the name Sjogren's, because one of its most recognized features is what it does to your tears and to your eyes. To understand what Sjogren's takes from you in this area, it helps to first understand what tears actually are and what they do, because most people think of tears as something that only appears when they cry. The reality is that your eyes are producing tears every single moment of every single day, and without them, the surface of the eye begins to break down rapidly. There are 3 types of tears. Basal tears are produced continuously and constantly to keep your eyes moist and healthy. They are clear and thin and they coat the surface of the eye in a 3-layered film that contains water, oils, and mucus, each layer serving a specific protective function. This tear film keeps the cornea, which is the clear front surface of the eye, hydrated, smooth, and protected from the environment. Reflex tears are produced in response to irritants like dust, smoke, or bright light, and they flood the eye quickly to flush out whatever is causing the irritation. Emotional tears are the ones most people are familiar with. They are produced in response to strong emotion and they carry a higher concentration of stress hormones than the other 2 types, which is one of the reasons crying can feel physically relieving. In Sjogren's, the immune system directly and aggressively targets the lacrimal glands, which are the glands located just above and to the outer corner of each eye and which are responsible for producing the aqueous, or water, layer of the basal tear film. Over time these glands become infiltrated by immune cells, damaged by inflammation, and scarred. As the scarring progresses, tear production drops significantly, and the protective tear film over the eye becomes thin, unstable, and inadequate. The medical term for this condition is keratoconjunctivitis sicca, and it is a defining feature of Sjogren's. Without adequate tear film the surface of the eye begins to suffer. The conjunctiva, which is the thin membrane covering the white of the eye, becomes chronically inflamed and irritated. The cornea itself becomes vulnerable to tiny surface abrasions and erosions that are too small to see but can be intensely painful. People with Sjogren's describe their eyes as feeling like they permanently have grit or sand inside them regardless of whether they rinse, blink, or rest. Some experience burning and stinging that builds throughout the day and peaks by late afternoon or evening. Some develop significant photophobia, which is a heightened and often debilitating sensitivity to light, making ordinary indoor lighting feel harsh and outdoor brightness feel almost impossible to tolerate. In more progressed cases the cornea develops scarring that can permanently alter vision, and some people experience episodes of blurred vision that fluctuate throughout the day depending on how unstable their tear film has become. What is happening in Sjogren's is that the very glands and the very mechanism designed to protect your eyes are being quietly and systematically dismantled by your own immune system, and the eye pays the price of that destruction one damaged cell at a time. If dry eyes have been part of your experience with Sjogren's, type the word tears in the comments and let the community know they are not alone in this. How Sjogren's impacts the immune system. Sjogren's is itself an immune system malfunction, but the downstream consequences of that malfunction go far deeper than the original attack on the glands. To understand this properly, it helps to understand what the immune system is actually doing in Sjogren's, because it is not simply overreacting. It is caught in a loop that becomes increasingly difficult to escape from and that carries very serious long-term consequences for the entire body. In Sjogren's, the immune system generates autoantibodies, most notably anti-SSA, also called anti-Rho, and anti-SSB, also called anti-La. These are antibodies that the immune system has mistakenly produced against the body's own proteins. They circulate through the bloodstream and drive widespread, sustained inflammation across multiple organ systems simultaneously. At the same time, B lymphocytes, which are a type of white blood cell responsible for producing antibodies, become chronically overactivated and begin accumulating in the salivary glands and other exocrine tissue. These accumulations of immune cells form structures inside the glands that drive further inflammation and further tissue damage. The immune system is not fighting an infection in Sjogren's. It is fighting itself, and it cannot stop. This sustained state of immune overactivation creates a paradox that is one of the most medically important and least discussed aspects of Sjogren's. While the immune system is hyperactive against the body's own tissue, the chronic exhaustion of immune resources and the dysregulation of immune cell populations means the body becomes progressively less capable of mounting an effective defense against genuine external threats. This is part of why people with Sjogren's often report getting sick more frequently, taking longer to recover from ordinary infections, and finding that their immune responses feel unpredictable and unreliable. The most serious long-term consequence of this sustained immune dysregulation is the significantly elevated risk of developing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a cancer of the white blood cells. This is not a rare or obscure finding buried in specialist literature. It is one of the most consistently documented and widely recognized complications of Sjogren's. Early studies reported the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in people with Sjogren's as being as much as 44 times higher than in the general population. More recent and larger studies have placed the true elevated risk lower than that initial figure, but across all research the consensus is clear. Sjogren's carries a meaningfully and significantly elevated lymphoma risk that cannot be dismissed or minimized. The specific type of lymphoma most commonly associated with Sjogren's is mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue lymphoma, or MALT lymphoma, which most often arises in the salivary glands. The biological reason this happens is that the sustained stimulation and accumulation of B lymphocytes in the gland tissue, driven by years of chronic inflammation, can eventually cross a threshold from a reactive inflammatory process into a cancerous one. The immune cells stop responding to normal regulation and begin multiplying in an uncontrolled way. This is why consistent, regular monitoring is not an optional extra for people living with Sjogren's. It is a medical necessity. If the immune system and lymphoma connection is something you want to understand better or something you want your community to know about, type the word immune in the comments. Your engagement may directly shape the next video on this channel. How Sjogren's impacts your appetite. One physical symptom of Sjogren's that rarely gets talked about openly or honestly is what it does to appetite and to the simple, fundamental act of eating. This is one of those areas where the invisible burden of Sjogren's becomes most apparent, because from the outside a person with Sjogren's looks like they are simply not eating very much or being difficult about food, when in reality the disease has quietly made eating physically difficult, painful, and exhausting in ways that most people around them cannot see or fully appreciate. Sjogren's attacks the salivary glands with the same immune mechanism it uses on the lacrimal glands. Over time the salivary glands become damaged and saliva production drops dramatically or disappears almost entirely, a condition called xerostomia. Most people think of saliva as something that appears when you smell food or see something appetizing, but the reality is that saliva is being produced constantly, and it is performing critical functions in your mouth every moment of every day. Saliva breaks down the carbohydrates in food even before you swallow, beginning the digestive process the moment food enters your mouth. It lubricates every bite so that food can be chewed, formed into a ball, and moved to the back of the throat without difficulty. It coats and protects the tooth enamel from acid and bacteria. It maintains the pH balance in the mouth that prevents fungal infections like oral thrush, which are already significantly more common in people with Sjogren's. And it is the lubricant without which swallowing is not a passive automatic process but a conscious, uncomfortable, and sometimes frightening one. Without adequate saliva, chewing becomes laborious. Food that should feel normal starts to feel dry and difficult to manipulate, sticking to the roof of the mouth, the tongue, and the inner cheeks. Food loses much of its taste and palatability because taste perception depends partly on the ability of saliva to dissolve flavor compounds and carry them to the taste receptors on the tongue. And swallowing dry or dense foods like bread, meat, crackers, or raw vegetables, can become painful or feel genuinely dangerous. Research has found that between 32 and 72% of people with Sjogren's experience dysphagia, which is the clinical term for difficulty swallowing, and that the primary driver of this in Sjogren's is the severe reduction in salivary flow. To cope, people with Sjogren's often begin unconsciously narrowing their diet, gradually eliminating entire categories of food not because they dislike them but because those foods have become too physically difficult to eat. They carry water everywhere. They take small careful bites. They avoid eating in public because the process of managing a dry mouth while trying to eat socially has become too stressful to navigate. Sjogren's also reaches beyond the mouth into the broader gastrointestinal tract. The esophagus, which is the muscular tube connecting the throat to the stomach, can be affected by nerve damage and motility changes driven by Sjogren's autoantibodies. The stomach itself can be affected, with some people developing delayed gastric emptying, also called gastroparesis, where food sits in the stomach too long because the normal muscle contractions that move it forward have been impaired. Acid reflux is significantly more common in people with Sjogren's. Nausea, epigastric discomfort, and bloating are reported widely across the Sjogren's population. The liver and pancreas, which are both exocrine glands and therefore within reach of the same immune attack that damages the salivary and lacrimal glands, can also be affected in some cases. The combination of dry mouth, altered taste, painful swallowing, esophageal involvement, and gut symptoms creates a situation where eating stops feeling like nourishment and starts feeling like a daily obstacle course. This is why unintentional weight loss, nutritional deficiencies, and dental decay are not uncommon in people living with Sjogren's. The disease does not just take away moisture. It takes away one of the most basic human experiences of comfort and sustenance. If your relationship with food has changed since your Sjogren's symptoms began, type the word "eat" in the comments. You are not imagining it and you are not alone in this. How Sjogren's impacts sleep. Sjogren's can make genuine, restorative sleep feel almost impossible, and the scale of this problem is far larger than most people outside the Sjogren's community realize. Studies have found that between 55 and 77% of people with Sjogren's experience insomnia, and that 75% report moderate to severe sleep disruption on a regular basis. Only about 1 in 4 people with Sjogren's reports consistently good sleep quality. This is not a coincidence or a secondary complaint. It is a direct and predictable consequence of what Sjogren's does to the body across every system it touches. The dryness does not switch off when you lie down at night. In fact, for many people with Sjogren's, nighttime is when the dryness becomes most acute and most distressing. Without the swallowing and the movement of the waking hours to keep moisture circulating, the mouth can become profoundly dry within the first hour or two of sleep, and people often wake with a mouth that feels cracked, tight, and painfully parched. The sensation is not comparable to ordinary thirst. It can be severe enough that people keep water on both sides of the bed, wake multiple times to drink, and still wake again before dawn because the dryness has returned. The eyes present a parallel problem. During sleep the eyelids are closed but the lacrimal glands are still not producing adequate tear film, and when a person with Sjogren's wakes the eyelids can feel stuck to the dry surface of the eye, requiring careful and sometimes painful reopening. Some people wake with a burning, stinging sensation in their eyes that takes significant time and eye drop application to relieve enough to return to sleep. Beyond the dryness itself, the joints and muscles present another barrier to sleep in Sjogren's. Research has found that people with Sjogren's are significantly more likely than people with other rheumatic conditions to be disturbed during sleep onset by muscular tension and restless legs. Nocturnal pain in Sjogren's is documented as notably worse than in comparable conditions. Neuropathic pain, which arises from the nerve damage that Sjogren's causes through its attack on the peripheral nervous system, tends to intensify during the night hours when there are fewer distractions to compete with it. The sensations associated with Sjogren's-related neuropathy include burning, stabbing, electric, and crawling feelings in the hands, feet, face, and other areas, and these sensations become most prominent precisely when the body is trying to be still and rest. At the biological level, the low-grade chronic inflammation that Sjogren's sustains throughout the body interferes directly with the natural sleep-wake cycle. Inflammatory cytokines, which are the signaling proteins that the immune system uses to coordinate its activity, disrupt the normal rhythms of the body's internal clock and interfere with the production of melatonin, the hormone that signals to the brain that it is time to sleep. The autonomic nervous system in Sjogren's is also commonly dysregulated, a condition called dysautonomia, and this dysregulation can keep the body in a low-level state of physiological alertness that makes winding down toward genuine sleep difficult even when exhaustion is overwhelming. The fatigue that results from this nightly cycle of disrupted sleep compounds every other symptom Sjogren's produces, and does so in ways that are measurable and severe. Studies show that in approximately 70% of Sjogren's cases, fatigue reaches levels that are genuinely disabling, significantly affecting both physical function and cognitive ability. This fatigue then feeds back into worsening brain fog, lowering pain tolerance, increasing emotional reactivity, and reducing the capacity to manage the practical demands of living with a chronic disease. Sleep in Sjogren's is not a lifestyle issue or a matter of better sleep hygiene. It is a medical consequence of a disease that interferes with rest at the biological, neurological, sensory, and structural levels simultaneously. If Sjogren's has stolen your sleep, type the word rest in the comments. Let's make sure every person who is fighting this disease at 3 in the morning knows this video exists, and that what they are going through has a name. Living with Sjogren's is physically and emotionally demanding, and it is important to remember that everybody's experience of this disease is different. There is no single right way to manage it. What matters is that you do not dismiss what your body is telling you, that you take the full picture of your symptoms seriously and not just the ones your appointments have time for, and that you connect with others who understand what this disease actually feels like from the inside. It is okay to not be okay. Sjogren's affects the brain, the heart, the eyes, the immune system, the way you eat, and the way you sleep, and taking care of yourself means paying attention to all of it, not just the most visible or most easily explained symptoms. If you want a tool that helps you track all of your Sjogren's symptoms in one place so you can walk into every appointment prepared and informed, our symptom map was built specifically for this community and it is available now through the link in the description. And if you found this video helpful, you may be interested in the video on the screen now. I look forward to seeing you soon.